Hey everybody, Mrs. Horn here. Today it's the nervous system, and we're going to talk about the functions of nervous systems across many organisms. We'll show you what a nerve looks like and how an impulse travels through it. I'll talk about some less complex organisms and what their nervous system looks like, and then we're going to get into the human nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, and then give you some specifics on your brain. So here we go. All nervous systems can do three things. They can receive a message, they can interpret the message, and then they respond to it in some way. So the first step would be that there are some receptors. They're going to collect information either internally or externally, and they're going to bring the information to the integration center. Now the picture here shows the human brain, but not all organisms have that same structure. So we keep it the term general, integration center. There, in the integration center, this is where the input is interpreted and the response is decided. What is the action going to be? And I put CNS there. That stands for central nervous system. That's what your central nervous system does, the brain and the spinal cord. It decides what the response should be. And then the third step is going to be that motor output, and this is the signal that's going to be sent to the nerves through the integration center to the effector cells where the response is going to be carried out. You can find those effector cells in muscles, any kind of voluntary muscle, which would help you walk or move your arm or sit up straight. That's where you're going to find those effector muscles or effector nerves. A neuron or a nerve cell is a cell just like any other cell in your body, but it has a very specific shape, and its shape determines its function. Just like the shape of an enzyme determines its function, or the shape of a protein determines its function, the shape of this cell determines its function. And some of the structures that you need to be very familiar with. The dendrites are the branches that surround the cell body. Inside the cell body, the dot that I have here, that is the nucleus. So the cell body, that's where all of the other organelles are going to be. So I only drew the nucleus, but all the other organelles that we're familiar with, endoplasmic reticulum, the mitochondria, the vacuoles, those are going to be found here. So although this cell is shaped very different from everything else in your body, it still contains all of the organelles that skin cells or liver cells do. The dendrites that I mentioned, these branches out here, they're going to receive messages from other neurons and then carry that message into the cell body. There are a lot of dendrites receiving messages from many different directions. The axon, which is this tail-like structure that runs to the tip of the nerve cell, that's going to carry that message from the cell body out to the terminal branches. It will only carry one message at a time. We have these cells called Schwann cells, and the S is capitalized because it's named after a person. And these, if you look at the axon, there are a bunch of Schwann cells that make up the axon. So the axon is almost like a wire that goes inside of this, and then these cells surround it. They're on the outside of it. They're supportive cells. They wrap the axon in this myelin sheath to keep it protected. And that myelin sheath is an insulation layer. The other thing I wrote up here, but I didn't make a description of it, the terminal branches. The terminal branches are where that signal is going to end. Excuse me. And then there will be a space, which is called a synapse, and then that message will hop over the synapse through some neurotransmitters and connect to the next set of dendrites for the next nerve cell. A reflex arc consists of, I have 7 steps here, and I want you to take a minute and number all of these things on your diagram, and then on the bottom part of the page, I have all those numbers explained. All right, so the first thing that happens, and this, sometimes when you go to the doctor as a kid, they tap your knee, and they're checking to make sure that your reflexes are normal. What they do is they're going to tap that tendon, and the tendon is actually connected to your quad muscle. When that happens, the sensory receptors in the quad are going to detect a change. The sensory neuron is going to convey that information over to the spinal cord. The information is going to travel through the synapses, which are the spaces between the neurons. It's going to travel through the synapses between the sensory and motor nerves. The motor neurons are going to signal the quad to contract. The sensory neurons will communicate with the interneurons of the spinal cord. And then the last thing that happens is that's going to inhibit the flexors from contracting. If we consider some other organisms, so a sponge. Sponge is a marine organism. It is an animal. This is something that's very simple. It has no nervous system. Then if we consider the evolution of life and becoming a little more complex, a hydra, which I have a very primitive sketch of what a hydra looks like, but it has a little foot at the bottom, it has a long slender body, and then has some tentacles at the top. These tentacles all have stinging cells on them, and that's how it will paralyze its prey so that it can eat. A hydra has what's called a nerve net, and I drew almost a grid here, and that's what makes up its body. It's a nerve net. So it doesn't have a central nervous system like we do, and there is not one location where all messages goes back to, but it does have nerves and it does send signals. A sea star or a starfish has what's called a nerve ring. So it has a ring of nerves around the central part of the star shape. A planaria, which is an organism I've talked about in class before, this will be its head, these are its eye spots, this is its body. It looks like a little small worm. It's a freshwater organism. These organisms can very easily generate if you were to cut it, and it can grow back a head or it can grow back a tail. A planaria does have a very small brain, and it does have some nerve cords. Believe that this could be the organism that had the first kind of central nervous system. If we get a little more complex, moving up to insects, it does have a more complex brain. It has a ventral nerve cord, which would be a nerve cord that would run along its abdomen area. And then our most complex organisms, the vertebrates, has a brain, has a central nervous system, and has a dorsal nerve cord, which would be your spinal cord, and that's a cord that would run along the back of your body. In a human, the nervous system is made up of two parts. So we have the central nervous system, and the central nervous system is made up of only two things, the brain and the spinal cord. The brain, which we'll get to more specifics later, can be broken up into many different sections, all with very specific functions. The spinal cord is simply going to convey the information to and from the brain. So it's going to collect information from all parts of the body and then bring it up to the brain. The peripheral nervous system, so if you were to subtract the brain and the spinal cord, the peripheral nervous system would have everything else. So that's going to help regulate the internal environment. Your cranial nerves are part of that system. These ganglia, which come off of the spinal cord, are part of that. And then all of these spinal nerves, receptor nerves, motor nerves, nerves that are connected to your skin, nerves that are connected to your muscles, those are all part of the peripheral nervous system. And then here's some more details on the peripheral nervous system. So the peripheral nervous system can be further subdivided into two divisions. We have the sensory division and we have the motor division. The sensory division would be all of the incoming information, or the efferent information. These are neurons that convey information to the central nervous system from sensory receptors. So this is the division that actually picks up information or picks up changes in the environment or the internal environment. The motor division has the word motor in it, so that's going to be anything outgoing. That's going to be the efferent. That's where if you have to move or there's a decision, the brain is sending some signal to move or get out of the way, that's going to be sent through the motor division. The sensory division has both the external and the internal environment that it has to try to maintain homeostasis with, so it has a lot of incoming information from inside and out of the body. I'm going to keep going here with the sensory division, and then I'll get back to the motor division. I didn't write anything else. Okay, move over to the motor division. The motor division is then broken into the stuff in your body that happens automatically, or the stuff that would be the somatic nervous system. So that would be your skeletal muscle, things that are any voluntary movement would be the somatic nervous system. From the autonomic nervous system, we have the parasympathetic division and the sympathetic division. Now, the parasympathetic division, I have some information written a little farther down. The parasympathetic division is going to help conserve energy at times of rest. This is going to help to slow your heart rate a little bit, not too much, but it's also going to increase your digestion. So the parasympathetic nervous system here is going to pick up while you're at nighttime, usually when you're sleeping. Whereas the sympathetic division is going to increase energy, getting ready to, move around, or this is happening during the day when you're awake, when you're very active. It's going to increase your heart rate and increase the glucose level that's in your blood so that there's more glucose available for cellular respiration to happen in your cells. So they are both part of the autonomic nervous system. You don't have to think about those things in order for them to happen. Your body just does it for you. And that's what I have here for a definition for the autonomic nervous system. Those are involuntary movements. They're signals that regulate the internal environment of your body, ultimately trying to keep your body at homeostasis. The somatic nervous system, like I said before, signals all of your skeletal muscles, and those are all voluntary movements. The next thing I have is a picture of the brain, and I want you to label the different sections of the brain. So I'm showing here in red, this is the hypothalamus. I also have the thalamus, which are two parts of the brain that we labeled in the endocrine system. And then this is the cerebrum. All of these sections make up the forebrain. The midbrain section I have here labeled in blue. And then the hindbrain is made up of the medulla, which is the section that's very close to the spinal cord, and the cerebellum, which is the part that's in the back of the head. And give you some details on those. The medulla is going to help to control all of your involuntary movements, and the cerebellum helps with coordination. The midbrain is going to receive and integrate the sensory information that's coming into the brain. That information will come in through the spinal cord. The thalamus helps with the sensory input. So information that's coming in, that's going to the cerebrum, and it also regulates information that's leaving the cerebrum. The hypothalamus, this is the part of the brain that controls your hunger, thirst, and body temperature. Okay, and the last page I have here shows another picture of the brain, but it's showing us what are different sections controlling. So take a minute and make sure you have those sections outlined. And so I've got two lines drawn through the brain. This section here is going to be your smelling and your hearing section of the brain. And then I also have a line right through the middle of the cerebrum. In the frontal lobe, we have, this is where speech is controlled. There's some motor cortex here. The motor cortex is going to send messages to your skeletal muscles. On the, over here we have the somatosensory cortex. This is going to control signals of touch, pain, pressure, any differences in temperature. There's another speech section of the brain here, taste, reading, and then in the very back of the brain, this section is what will control your vision. So please make sure you have all the lobes labeled and everything inside here labeled along with the extra information on the outside. And that wraps up the nervous system, and I hope this helps.